Okay. So we're in here. It's been a while. So I'm shocked exchanging Mr. Mitchell with me. Obviously, we're back on our ground again. It's been a while. We'll take a little mental break, but today we'll discuss, of course, the economy, and we'll discuss Goldman's $10 billion investment in Black women. As far as the economy is concerned, I think all the talk has been about inflation, which we've known about for a while. We knew that when the economy bounced back really quickly after the pandemic, that there was going to be some inflation. We think some inflation is probably due to price gouging by businesses. This is like a 100 year event for certain businesses, and they're taking advantage of it. They're going for it in terms of whether it's aluminum or commodities or gasoline, or what have you. The first time we noticed it, at least it came to my attention, was when uh, Pfizer and Moderna need those cold storage machines to transport their vaccines at very low temperatures, and all of a
Mm,
sudden the cold storage machines, the cost was growing at double, triple previous rates. But they were just
yep.
price gouging. You need these things, and we're going to price gouge. So this is a one in 100 year event. Now you see gasoline prices going through the roof. I'm sure there's some price gouging also due to sort of skirmishes and between Russia or potential skirmishes between Russia and the Ukraine. Um, we already talked about commodities previously. Also, all those ships sort of circling the Bay Area and not really having a place to offload materials or goods and services. But some of that may have been excuses too. Again, this is a 1 in 100 year event, and capitalists are going to capitalize. That's what they do. So, and I don't think the price gouging is going to stop after the Fed raises interest rates. So the Fed's been talking about raising interest rates a couple months ago. It's a head fake, and now I think they're really going to do it in earnest. But it's not going to stop the price gouging. So it's from a 20,000 foot level. The CPI rose, I think, 7.5% in January, and the CPE, excuse me, PCE, personal consumption expenditures, which the Fed tracks, which excludes energy, food, and rent, rose 5.8% in December. So that was the first sign that inflation is going to the roof, and they've been trying to get the PCE at 2% for years. Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, they couldn't do it. That was their excuse for keeping interest rates low, and the lower they kept interest rates, the more um, prices for assets like real estate and the stock market kept rising in a low interest rate environment. That was their excuse for keeping interest rates low. They couldn't get the PCE to 2%. Now it's like triple that. So what was a problem now has become a fact. They couldn't get it up. Now it's become another problem. They have to try to cool it down, and either way, the consumer gets hit. Either way, it's getting hit in a slow growth economy. They're getting hit during inflationary pressures because a lot of these things that they need are what we call inelastic goods, things they have to have, whether it's rent, cost for college, food, gasoline to go to work. They can't avoid it. So that's sort of the backdrop. We'll see what the stock market does over the next few months as the Fed probably raises interest rates in earnest. So that's sort of my take on the economy. It's hard to look at all the vital signs because we're still coming out of a pandemic, like unemployment rates and that type of stuff. But the CPI and the PCE rise is real. So that's sort of my take on a 20,000 foot level.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm every time we talk about the economy, I feel like I'm the Debbie Downer of the crew, where I don't think ever since we've been doing these programs, I don't think that I've really had too many positive things to share about the overall economy because I've been on this soapbox for the better part of 5 years, really. It- and now we are kind of living in the sky is falling scenario that you know it was pretty clear to me. The question for me circa 2015 2016 was the when, never the if. Even like kind of thinking back to that era, even major banks was sounding the alarm in a very major bank way. So for folks don't really know what that means, that most multinational banks tend to be very careful with what they say, right? You will never really see or hear Jamie Dimon or B of A ever come out and explicitly say, well, the sky is falling. Start packing up beans, preserving water, going in the bunker because, things getting ready to hit the fan. They tend to kind of dance around, meander a little bit, and part of that is because they have to play politics to a certain degree. And frankly, when you're the bank, you have interest on both sides of the fence that you can benefit from. So any strong statement in either direction tends to alienate the other side. So they tend to play kind of middle of the road politics in their statements. But the thing that stood out to me was the fact that B of A, Citi, Morgan Stanley, Chase had all pretty much agreed that we would be looking at another recession, and this recession would be worse than the 0809 recession. Now, again, if you're not like me, that typically reads boring bank PR news, um, you wouldn't really understand that the fact that collectively multinational banks agreed, that was a sign of a black swan event in and of itself. The only differentiator between all of them was the win. Some had it pegged for 2020, others had it pegged for 2021, some had it pegged for Q4 or Q3 2019. So they were all pretty much in agreement that this event is going to take place. There's too much essentially underlying income inequality. There's too much job stagnation within the labor market. There's too many essentially non-market participants within the labor market because of the way that we measure employment. And for folks that don't know, when you're looking at a jobs report and you're looking at the unemployment numbers, that they're largely skewed because once someone is on unemployment beyond 6 months, you no longer are counted as if the oxygen left your body and you just dropped off the face of the earth. So you're no longer included in those numbers. So when you include the folks that is what's known as chronically unemployed at that point, you're talking about somewhere between 90 and at that time, excuse me, about 98 million people, which is a huge number. Let's remind that there's just about 400 million, give or take a few, people in this country. So you're nearly talking about a fourth of this country that is chronically unemployed. And this is back in 2015, 2016.
Well,
One of the other, yep,
on that point though, when you have young men, working age young men unemployed, that tends to create
yep,
a lot of angst. It's almost like a powder keg.
100%. That's why the age distribution of unemployment tends to be a signifier for growth. What are the prospects in education? What are the prospects for home ownership? How are the assets essentially going to be built over the next generation? And one of the markers that you can kind of build your crystal ball around is what is the labor force within that 18 to 25 demographic. What does the next decade kind of look like with some degree of accuracy? And one of the other things that was noticed, matter of fact, Kaufman does a study every few years that tracks the cost of healthcare. I've mentioned this several times. Just between 2015 and 2019, the cost of healthcare, including premiums, including out-of-pocket costs, have risen 58%. 58%. And you can't continue taking wallet share, that much wallet share. So another way of saying that is 58 cents out of every dollar should be kind of set aside for healthcare costs. So when you look at it through that lens, that's taking a significant chunk of wallet share or household income that has to be dedicated towards rising healthcare costs, with no clear road to alleviating some of those costs, and that's under the ACA. I almost shiver to think what those healthcare costs would have looked like without some of the cap restraints that the Affordable Care Act managed to put in. But the long and short is that, when you look at the economic metrics, it didn't take Jamie Dimon, it didn't take Morgan Stanley analysts, it didn't take any genius economist. I think a fifth grader could have figured out that this road is going to lead to some bad consequences.
Right.
And the backing of that was largely built on monetary policy. When you continue to give your friends $80 billion a month, and at that point, we had already came up with this concoction of, well, too big to fail, so let's make it even bigger. And let's consolidate the financial system even more, because the housing crisis that crippled entire cities like Detroit, Stockton, went completely bankrupt. Greece, Iceland, whole countries going bankrupt. That concentration wasn't enough. Let's go even more concentrated and triple down on this ingenious strategy. And not only that, what was supposed to be a temporary fix, and I think a lot of folks have forgotten that original plan that Geithner and Hank Paulson came up with was a Band-Aid and was essentially supposed to work like a bridge loan. It's like, here's some working capital because you got some cash coming in, but you got to pay your folks before that cash comes in. So here's a little loan to get you over a hump. And so it was never meant to go on beyond a few years. And, 5-6 years ago, we were already in that bad monetary policy for the better part of 7-8 years. And we kicked it off for another, 6 years beyond?
Right. Well, I
beyond
originally thought QE was going to be like a couple
right.
months.
Right. Like, you can't just hang on to QE forever. I mean, it literally is a temporary measure that the Fed uses almost really as a quick fix. And so, in other words, it wasn't hard to be able to call this. The pandemic almost had a negligible effect on the direction that we were going. Pandemic just simply exacerbated issues that were already there. I don't even really blame the pandemic for the economic condition that we're in. You almost can't even point to anything that was purely a result of the pandemic to say, oh, well, we had, supply issues purely because of the pandemic. We actually were already having supply issues prior to the pandemic. Again, it just exacerbated it. But to your other point about the price gouging, I think for me, the eye opener was the LA ports. when is I think for months we heard, especially from March pretty much to July, the slowdown. Obviously, folks were quarantining, offices were shutting down, so there's less manpower, right? So I think that there was a natural inclination to believe that okay, there's less people working, there's which results in less inventory and less opportunities to be able to ship things. And then I believe it was either Reuters or the AP that ended up doing a nice write up, pretty much stating that in so many terms that nah, that's all BS. You had this almost the equivalent of another island of nothing but shipping containers just sitting at the ports.
Right.
So the shipping containers made it. They were in the country, but they were not being unloaded. And these large multinational corporations were not motivated to move the inventory that was there. So it was an intentional bottleneck. And with
Right.
that
Right.
bottleneck, they had to now run up costs because every day that inventory sits, it increases cost. And where does that cost get passed down to? The end user, aka the customer.
Uh,
So we ended up paying that additional cost to some intentional, or what seemed like very intentional, price gouging. I think I brought it up, the irony that Amazon participated in the crackdown of the price gouging that was happening in early 2020, where we started seeing even FBI cracking open U-Haul storages,
mm,
and you're finding tons of hand sanitizer and wipes and PPE that average folks had saw an opportunity, decided, hey, we live in a country supposedly built on capitalism. I found a market dislocation. Let me take advantage of that market dislocation by scooping up as much inventory as the cash in my bank account can afford, and then charging an upcharge for it. That I believe we call that capitalism 101, right?
right. Right.
It's like you find something, a resource at a low price, and then you turn around and sell it for a higher price, and the difference becomes profit at that point. But here you had Amazon assisting in cracking down on folks, and not to say that the prevention of a price gouge is inherently wrong, but the irony of this multinational company that has built their model on price gouging, who actively gouge the very small businesses that rely on that platform. There's literally hundreds of thousands of stories of small business entrepreneurs that have gotten tanked by Amazon because they use AWS, because they put their products and services on Amazon, and Amazon has access to all of their data, including their manufacturing costs, including who their manufacturers are. And Amazon, being the absolute profit beast that they are, can afford to scoop up a small business that's doing 5 million bucks and end up eating their complete cost, so much so that it pushes that small business owner out of business. Jeff Bezos years ago made it very clear that his intention was to become the sole source of commerce in the country. So I just found it very ironic that Amazon was participating and getting kudos. Like, oh my God, look at how great Amazon is. This is what corporate social responsibility looks like. Uh, let's essentially put these guys in handcuffs and throw them in jail that are trying to take advantage of the American people and this pandemic. Yet Jeff Bezos is not in handcuffs, and then we're wondering about inflation.
Right, right, right.
Okay,
Yeah, I think it was.
okay,
I think it was Mark. I think it was Mark Twain said, you still a loaf of bread. You go to jail. You steal $1 million. You can run for Congress or something. Right? So so it depends. Right,
exactly,
the little man. Yeah, the little man is called stealing. When you give
exactly,
money to businesses, it's called capitalism. When you give it to the
exactly,
small, to the
exactly.
business, it's called a handout. But
So
it's gonna be another recession, and all when the Obama administration and the Federal Reserve, all they did was delay an inevitable, so that the next recession won't be born by Obama's donors, somebody he wanted to work for when he left the office, or somebody he wanted to sleep with. But there's going to be another recession. He just made sure
oh,
that
that,
it wasn't going to impact, you know, you know, I guess you call it crony capitalism. Wasn't going to impact his donors. That's basically
oh,
it.
that is definite facts. I think we've talked about it several times before, but I feel like every time we discuss the economy, more smoke continues to come out, and specifically the Hall of Hypocrites. I almost feel like I want to maybe we should do a series on on the Hall of Hypocrites because just not even 2 days ago, I think at this point, 3 days ago, a story on Yahoo Finance came out with Charlie Munger it was asked, and Munger was asked, and for folks that don't know, it's the right hand man of Warren Buffett over at Berkshire Hathaway. Munger came out and on the question of inflation, how where does he think this goes? What happens to the country as a result of inflation, et cetera, et cetera? And pretty much a softball question. And his response was that in 100 years, the dollar is going to go to zero, and there's going to be a rise of Hitler. Kid you not. He
Well, it's
said
gonna be somebody. I guess
that
somebody
this is
in beer halls or whatever, hollering, screaming at the government, and it's gonna become like a populist sort of leader or whatever.
right. That, inflation kills democracies, you know, and essentially the intersection of how a productive country, and, he obviously gave the example of Germany and Weimar, how this was at the time prior to World War II. Germany was one of the most productive countries, one of the most established democracies, and 40% of the folks voted and supported Hitler because of the inflationary environment that the country was in due to bad monetary policy. Uh, and my mouth was on the floor, not simply because of the comparison to Hitler or this doom and gloom. In fact, compared to Charlie Munger, my doom and gloom that we've talked about offline, my kind of Mad Max scenario of where this country is headed unless something change, some massive changes. I believe I've said it even on camera a few
You mean
times.
where our country? You mean where our country's headed?
Right.
Ain't gonna be no massive change.
Right. Right. Well, I've stated before, it's going to take some FDR type policies because the country during the Great Depression was headed in a very clear path without any real effort to change. Hence the New Deal, and without such an aggressive governance and social policies, yeah, there's no amount of money printing that the Fed can do to prevent this crash course. However, compared to Hitler and coming out
Right.
with an autocrat, my Mad Max scenario seems almost like Peter Pan.
Right. But yeah,
It's like,
but
so but my point is that where was Charlie Munger 6 years ago?
right,
Where was this sentiment 4 years ago? Where was this
right,
sentiment 10 years ago? You have Muhammad Al Iran coming out Kathy Wood coming out, all with literally within the last 4 months, coming out saying very similar sentiments. Oh, we got to close the wealth gap. Income inequality is going to start a civil war. Really, really.
Right,
Where were
right.
you at 6 years ago, 4 years ago, 12 months ago? Because I
Right,
believe
right.
12 months ago, Kathy Wood was soaking up all the spotlight as the Wall Street darling and kind of bad girl, right? That, oh, you have this woman that's beating out all the male fund managers and the male
Mhm.
dominated world. You couldn't make a move on CNBC, Squawk Box, Bloomberg, etc., without the Kathy Wood effect over the last 12 months. Not one time over that over that previous 12 months was the primary talking point. Hey, we got to fix this wealth gap. We got to
Right,
fix
right,
income inequality
right. Well,
because of these bad monetary policies. This is why I'm successful, because my fund has scooped up some of the assets that bad
right.
monetary policy has been able to prop up. So
Yeah.
me dropping 30 million, 100 million into speculative companies, I can seem like a genius because it goes from, $3 a share jumping to $40 a share in a 3 day period.
Because you got the Fed. Yeah,
Like
you got
not
the
one
yeah, yeah,
time did we hear.
yeah. You have the Fed. You have the Fed underlying all these investments. So you can't go wrong
Exactly.
as long as you know the Fed's what the Fed's doing. But years ago, especially during the Obama administration, people were calling you a fringe group if you said stuff they're saying now. You were a fringe group.
Right.
But anyways, there's gonna be another recession, and it seems like Kathy Wood, Elarian, and Munger seem like the type of people who um stole your keys and they're gonna help you look for them.
Exactly. That's
So
that's the perfect
they're pretending like
analogy.
they're pretending like they pretend like they care, but they're the ones behind it. So, but anyway,
Exactly. And scooping up the benefits
right, right.
as
We have to
well.
do income inequality after we have to put more Gatorade in the bottle after we taken the last drop. You know.
Right.
But
Exactly.
anyway, so pivot to Goldman Sachs investing $10 billion into black women, and this is one of the things that I thought was funny because a couple months ago when this news came out, or a few weeks ago when this news came out, there was a black African American studies professor, I can't think of his name, who was saying, well, "What about black men?" He connected the dots. Like when
Mm.
when the Obama administration said we're gonna give money to these people, certain people, we're gonna pick the winners. Rising tides lift all boats. Nobody said a word. Now they're
Hmm.
seeing what that looks like. You're giving money to Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or the investor class who don't look like us and don't have our best interests at heart. Who knows what they're gonna do with that money? Now they're giving it to who they can give it to whoever they want to give it to, and it's trickling
Yep.
down to black women. And the black study African American studies professor couldn't connect those dots 10 years ago. You thought you had no idea this was gonna happen. That Goldman Sachs was gonna pick who they gave the money to, and it wasn't gonna be you.
Right.
While they were praising Obama.
Does he still have a job
I
after
don't know,
making that
but
statement?
I guess their job is to point out something right in front of you.
Right.
The tsunami hit yesterday. Oh my God, that was devastating, wasn't it? Describing how they want to be the news reporter, tell you what happened after the
Right.
fact, instead of the weatherman who's got to predict what's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? And so they're
Right.
telling you what's happening right in front of them. You can see, a lot of people can only see what's right in front of them. But I guess people are connecting the dots now. Oh my God, that wasn't a good idea after the fact. But anyway, so
Right.
this I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna try to share my screen right quick. A clip of someone on CNN sort of describing this investment scheme. So here goes.
The Biden administration kicks off a nationwide tour to promote economic recovery in their plan. It needs to hit big, especially for one of the hardest hit demographics in this pandemic, and that is Black women in America. The latest jobs report shows for Black women, they are not recovering as quickly as their white counterparts economically. And right now, Black women only make 66 cents for every dollar paid to a white man in this country. So Goldman Sachs just came out with a plan to invest $10 billion in 1 million Black women by 2030. Try to tackle this issue. Margaret Anadou is with me now. She's the global head of sustainability and impact for Goldman Sachs asset management business, also the youngest woman to ever be named youngest a partner at the firm. Margaret, it's very good to have you. Let's talk about the numbers here. I mean, you guys have data that shows that Black women hold 90% less wealth in America now than white men. It has only gotten worse. It's increased since the 80s. And it is happening at every stage of a Black woman's life. How can even $10 billion address this crisis?
So what we think we can do with the $10 billion is really start to invest in the areas that are contributing to that wealth gap. So one of the things that we explore in the research Black Womenomics is all of the pieces that really build up to that wealth gap. And what it demonstrates is that all the key factors that actually help someone build economic prosperity in this country and build that wealth across whether it's access to capital for entrepreneurship, housing where we see lots of equity built, things like healthcare access that make you healthy to be in the workforce and move your life forward. All of these areas we see significant disadvantage for Black women. And so the idea behind the $10 billion is if we can invest in solutions in those spaces, right? Quality, affordable housing, access to quality healthcare in communities, access to capital for Black women to grow their businesses and hire more employees in their community, we can start to narrow those gaps. And it's not just about those 1 million Black women specifically, but it's about their families, it's about their communities. And that's why we think we're going to get just the broader economic lift out of it in terms of economic growth, job creation. And that's why we're focusing on Black.
Okay. All right. So it's a brief synopsis. Just what she's saying, I think a lot of the statistics she's making, you can make it with, some of the statistics with Black men as well. I'm trying to, it just seemed like they randomly picked Black women, but the statistics they're pointing out seem to be like a straw man argument that, it's going to help Black women, so on and so forth. But ultimately, like I said, the government's giving money to hands of people who don't necessarily have our best interest of our community, who don't have the best interest of our community at hand. And also, you don't have African Americans who deciding what's best for our communities coming from Goldman Sachs, which seems rather odd. I'm sure they think they're doing something, some type of community outreach. That's great, but ultimately, would this sort of create a gender divide or sort of amplify a potential gender divide in the Black community? Because I can't think. This is definitely a U.S. construct. I can't think of any other country where someone says we're going to give money to these women over the men in a particular group. Is this definitely a U.S. construct?
It's actually a really good question. So what immediately comes to mind, and I will say as a counterpoint, is Kiva. So I don't know if you're familiar with Kiva by chance, Kiva. They were kind of some of the I guess I hesitate to use the word pioneer within microfinance, because I feel like it's just another fanciful way to say you're taking a little bit of money and you're trying to make $1 out of 15 cents, right? And Black people have been doing that for how long? Right. So, however, I'll say it's one of the I guess more recent companies that have gotten a large amount of visibility and a large amount of capital behind them in order to execute. So I'll say that. So they do a lot within microfinance. The U.S. division, if I remember correctly, is Accion, Accion. But their initial goal was to partner with banks within developing countries, and give these small or kind of micro loans. As a result of that, I believe the first few years they, were taking back some of the data, have found that specifically women were actually more responsible borrowers. They required less capital. And when I say micro, I do mean micro. For folks that want to check them out, I actually encourage to check them out. I've contributed to Kiva, even I guess disclaimer, right? Even participated as a mentor. They have a few entrepreneurial programs, etc. But individuals that would like to invest in Kiva or contribute, so they're like $25, $50, $100. And what they do is they give the money they collect to a local bank that they've partnered with within Africa, within South America. And the bank is the one that still does all the due diligence and ultimately determines who gets the loan. But they have essentially this bag of cash to be able to distribute loans from. And when they looked at the result of when these loans were, like who these loans were being distributed to, how long it would take for the borrowers to essentially return the principal plus interest. The evidence, and I'm sure, we can Google it at some point. But the data was pretty interesting. And what sat at the top was, again, that women tended to be kind of more responsible borrowers, needed less. And they highlighted a few specific industries that women tended to focus on, which were either food driven or kind of necessity. So whether it was things that were required around the household for that particular community, etc. And they tended to pool their resources together. So like 5 women would go to the bank and, they get their $100 loan, and then they end up pooling the resources together and ultimately building this growing community of entrepreneurs, right? So I will counter to that point that I think for years at this point, because we're talking like over a decade at this point, at least when I was first introduced to that program. Point being is that this idea that when you invest in women, you invest in the future. There's an adage, and I'm sure I'm getting ready to chop it up, but that I think you educate a man, you educate a household, but you educate a woman, you educate a generation or a community. And I think there is some logic behind that.
But that's a narrative. That's a narrative, though, right? I mean, how
It
does
is.
that
It's a
apply?
narrative.
How does that apply? I mean, I think women are gonna tend to be more practical in general in terms of investing. Men gonna be a little more speculative. They're more like
Sure, right?
but I
That
mean,
we tend to be more
but
risky, right?
but
Right.
that I don't think that was one of the things that lady mentioned. That was one of the attributes she mentioned.
No. I'm just.
Secondly, you're making a
Mhm.
qualifier why somebody's qualified for a loan or qualified for investment. Goldman Sachs was about to go belly up in 2008. You know what I'm saying? This is coming from Goldman Sachs, who nobody
Right.
has a standard for them.
Right. No, I'm
The
just.
standards for everybody else but Goldman.
I'm
You follow what I'm saying?
addressing the
Right.
question of
Oh,
does it
okay.
create a gender divide, right?
Okay.
Because I think it's a fair question. For those that may have, especially within the Black community, I feel like these gender wars rear their head. And I think more recently with the advent of social media.
Okay.
Um, and it seems to rear its head now every few months.
I
Right?
get it.
I don't think I've ever seen nor heard this much vitriol within the black community between genders. There's always been some intra-community tension, simply because when you take any community of people, not just black people, but any community of people, you strip them of their rights for literally hundreds of years. Then you give them rights with strong limitations, aka Jim Crow. In other words, when you continue to put a community through oppression, denigration, you continue to strip every attempt to bootstrap themselves out of their situation through racial terrorism, through financial denigration and financial terrorism, then you are going to have some intra-community issues where that gender divide rears its head, right? If the
Well, but
men
to
aren't
your
able
to,
to
but to your
protect,
point,
yeah,
to your point, the first time I ever heard it was on social media. I never heard it outside social media.
not to like, I feel
And
like
so
we've
and so
always had, because even if you go back to um uh essentially black feminism, right? If you go back to Patricia Hill Collins, if you go back to Bell Hooks, if you go back to the architects of black feminism, that was a cry for that divide. However, it still did not match, in my opinion, still doesn't match the vitriol that we're seeing today. You
well,
have this whole group of divestors, for example,
well
that specifically speak against even dating, marrying, having relations of any sort with black men. If you're a black woman, you need to divest from the black community, period. So, these type of rising movements that actually have traction is not just on social media. So I think, like, to that question, in other words, it is a fair question, but I just wanted to give some
got it,
counterpoint that we
got it.
do have some examples where um, that, yes, a narrative, but also data, also resources have been targeted specifically for one gender
Mm.
over another, really for the same reasons that are being purported with the Goldman program. That here we have this these set of underrepresented people, and coincidentally, these people are of a certain gender, of a certain race. So,
It just seems
yeah,
like it seems like there's a fight for resources, and
yep,
they're gonna this fight's gonna continue as you're getting this dystopian sort of motif here. When the economy turning down and there's only limited resources, it seems like a fight for resources, and women seem like black women seem like we're saying, give it to us.
yeah,
That's what it seems like to
yeah.
me.
No,
We want the resources, and they can come up. They can come up. I bet they have all kinds of new words. I don't. I mean, I'm old in country. I was country when country wasn't cool. Me and Tammy Wynette, divester, and this and that. I don't have time to look up all these words, but I bet they got some cool words and polysyllabic words and all kinds of like
right.
psychobabble. Why they should get the resources and men shouldn't. I bet they got all kinds of reasons.
You
You
know
know what I'm
what?
saying?
I'm conflicted because I agree. Like, I agree at the root of it all, right? When we strip away race and class, at the end of the day, all analysis, whether economic, whether social, is simply an analysis of resources and how those resources are
Right.
ultimately either being used, attained, contained, or
Right.
built on.
Right.
And how we use these resources, how we attain these resources, causes divides that we identify along race and class.
Well,
And
these black women have access to these men, to these white men who have the resources. Somehow they got access to them, and they're having
yeah,
conversations
like
we're not having. They're in the rooms when we're not privy to. I mean, as a clear blue sky, I'm hearing about we need to have a black woman on the Supreme Court. Where'd that come from? Just like the clear blue sky. It just all what I'm saying, it's like all these people in Biden's ear and all
right,
these
right,
people in
right,
Goldman's
right.
ear and Obama's ear. Why should go to black women and blah 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 blah. And it's like
Well, I think here's the trick bag for me, and I specifically call it a trick bag because this is where the conflict, my internal conflict, comes in. Because going back to the earlier the earlier conversation, right, about economics, we're watching this hall of hypocrites. In other words, same people that have sat at the table, gotten fattened off the calf, and now when the stripping of resources, like, let's be clear, when we're talking about the investor class, we're not talking about the fact that you got a couple $100,000 in your 401k, or you even make, even a couple $100,000 annually. You are upper middle class at best. At best. You are not a part of the 1%. You are
right.
not a part of the 3%. So certainly the 1% of the 1%. So when we're talking about the investor class, let's be very clear that that's who we are addressing.
Yeah, we're not talking about
Because
somebody got to go back to work the next day. You know what I mean? 'Cause most of these people who,
exactly, if you
yeah,
got to work to make your living on a daily basis, because if you don't work that week, that month, you're going to be out living in your car. You are not a part of the investor class. So so take a breath. However, there are more of us than there are of them. The investor class can continue to talk above us, continue to be in rooms, a part of cliques that we are not privy to. However, they are reliant on the labor that trickles up. When you talk about capitalism, you're really talking about the way that we divide labor. So when you get to a point that you have stripped the majority of the labor force of not only the discretionary income, but their non discretionary income, to the point that the returns become diminishing. And that's really the point that I'm making about the Hall of Hypocrites. These people have been living high off the hog for the last 13, 14 years. And now that the American public has gotten to a point that pockets are so strained that there is no room to literally squeeze out another penny. Now the concern is the income inequality. Now the concern is the increased political polarization. Now the
but
concern is the racial wealth gap.
but
And the
okay,
person that was sitting at that, or just let me stick, I'm, gonna stick this last point, because the folks that was sitting dead center in the middle of that was Goldman Sachs. That's the
oh,
trick
okay, all
bag.
right, right,
That's the
right, right,
trick
right,
bag. That
but
that
the
now black women are so near and dear to your heart
right,
that you
exactly, exactly, right.
gotta.
But at the same point, so when you say trick bag, who? I mean, have you heard black women? I mean, other than like trolls, like Republican trolls, because you have somebody who can get a lick or get some publicity, just keep repeating Republican talking point. Who was calling stuff out years
Right,
ago? It's mostly black men,
right.
and so if
Exactly.
when you call it trick bag, who's going to be able to see that trick bag? Who's going to buck against the trick bag? But I don't want to just be a worker all my life. I want to move up to I can become the boss. You feel what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So
Yep.
who can fit into that model where we can be in charge and we can give resources to people who aren't going to buck the system?
Yep.
Women typically aren't going to buck the system. They're going to be more survivalists. You know what I'm saying? They're
Exactly.
looking to survive within the system. Women are going to be more introspective, not prospective. Men going to look at a problem and try to solve it. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? Women are going
That's
to be more introspective. So these people who are the resource going to try to find ways to find people who aren't going to buck the system, and that's not going to be black men. They're going to find ways to give resources, give opportunity. Everybody but black men who aren't going to buck the system and going to be gracious. Going to be thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you for letting me work for you, and blah blah blah. Because a lot of black men, they don't want to be workers all the time. They want to be their own bosses. You know what I'm saying? They're going to be
right.
prospective,
Yeah.
where women are going to be introspective, and they're going to like try to survive and try to work within the system. They're not going to question. They're not going to question the system per se. You know what I'm saying? They're not
And
going to like
that's,
try to change the system.
that's also where, the I guess kind of moral conundrum comes in, because um our community has been so financially denigrated. And I think I've given this example before, that the Atlantic, that was what, 2016, 2017, um did a write up on looking at the last 100 years. How have the last 100 years of quote unquote progress within the black community, and one of the markers of progress, and specifically wealth building, is ownership. So we tend to talk about home ownership, but more importantly, land ownership. And 100 years ago, from that point of 2016, so you looked at 1916, the total amount of land that black people own within the U.S. Was, I believe, roughly over 1.1%. So I believe it was like 1.2, 1.3%. Fast forward to 100 years later, 2016, black people actually own less than one half of 1%. So we've largely regressed, which
Right.
is the point. And the material reality is that after that length of time, because regardless of the tropes that are out there, you will not find a harder working group of folks than black people. Like, period. That's not even up for debate. You will not find a more enterprising group of folks. However, you will also not find a more targeted group of folks that we have literally decades of documented history, that there were black people that founded whole states. Look at the state
Right.
of
Exactly.
Arkansas.
Right.
Black people have tried to literally start their own communities, build
Mm-hmm.
their own governments, to be
Right.
self-governing, to be self-determining, to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So the point of why I'm bringing that up again is because after so long of getting a certain result, I can't necessarily blame uh, black women for looking at the result.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, like, let's take out the emotions.
Uh-huh.
Let's take out the finger pointing. It's like, whoa, black man should have did this, black women should have did that. Like, let's take all of that out the equation for a moment, because the ball has actually never moved, and it still comes down to resources, right?
But on
So
that
it
point, but
always
Tori,
comes down to the attaining of the resources. So from that lens, that's why I say I'm conflicted, because I don't necessarily blame black women
but
for looking at, we still have to have resources, right? Like, we
but
still, you know
but
what I mean? Like,
but
we still got to
on that point
provide.
though,
Hmm.
you have a lot of people who do all this analysis, and they say, well,
Yep.
land does and home ownership that, and blah 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 blah. And you
Right.
look at 2008 to 2022,
Okay.
when the country is about to come to the United States is about to sink like a Titanic.
Hmm.
And the Obama administration and Federal Reserve prints money and gives it to everybody but black folks.
Right.
So people keep doing this analysis, but they avoid.
Right,
They found this. It's a magic. It's like magic. They can praise Obama and then quote these statistics at the same time. Because everybody was about to have nothing, and all of a sudden, when you give money
right.
to, so when you say African Americans have been targeted, and they've still been targeted, but it's a sleight of hand where you print money, give it to everybody but African Americans. These people use this money to weaponize themselves against black folks and poor people. So
But that's the trick bag.
So
And that's
I'm saying,
why I say
yeah, you're giving statistics.
I'm conflicted. Like
right,
I'm conflicted.
right.
Because I recognize
you have
both
black,
sides.
but you have black folks blaming the victim, like, oh, well, black man does. If the
Right.
government giving money to everybody equally, we may not have this problem.
Right.
So
And
you're giving money to
that's the
Goldman
other
Sachs
side of
and
that point.
real estate developers and private equity from who buying up all the land. That's why, and you're not giving resources to black folks. So
Right.
are you gonna blame the black man, or are you gonna give Obama a pass?
Exactly. I mean, listen, that's literally a part of why I say that I'm conflicted, because I see both sides of it. The other thing that
Okay.
you have to ask is, when did Lloyd Blankenfeld find black women so investable?
Right. Exactly.
How old is he? When did
I
Cohen
don't know.
find black women so investable? These
Right.
people have been on planet Earth for how many
Right.
decades?
Right. It's politics.
And black
It's
women
politics.
just became like they
Right. It's
poof
politics.
out of thin air. It's like,
It's,
like, what is the intention, in other words? And does it stoke that divide? And I think inherently it does stoke that
that's
divide.
the purpose. That's the purpose.
I tend to agree. Even cynicism aside, um, even the going through the program, it's even just looking at the program itself, kind of taking it for face value. So if we completely ignore everything that we just previously said, it's like, okay, well, let's judge the efficacy or the intended efficacy of this program. You're talking about 10 billion over 10 years, so $1 billion a year. Like, again, how much money has Goldman scooped up from the Fed over the last 14 years? And then, two, how much profit have they made on the money that
Right.
the Fed
Right.
has cut to them? And you're talking about $1 billion stinking dollars a
Right. We're
year?
also going to
Goldman
give you.
literally pays more money in fines to FINRA and the SEC for compliance violations
Right.
than that on an annual basis. Like, that's
You also
literally drops in the bucket. And you're talking about trying to address, because there are about 6 areas that they're trying to address: housing, finance, which includes financial literacy, access to banks, etc., education. Did I say healthcare already?
everything you're saying, Torian. Everything you're saying was probably, you could say the same thing when I came out of business school back in the early '90s. The exact same thing.
Right. That's
Exact same thing.
the
And
point.
they're giving resources to black women when the assets are here. The Goldman was
Exactly.
buying at the ground floor in 2008. They're giving access to black women after assets have been spiked to here. And then also, it's just the best time to start a business when we hit into a recession.
Goldman is giving you the equivalent of a 2012 Honda Civic with 100,000 miles.
Right.
They had it shined. They put some new wheels on it. They replaced the stereo for a CD player. And then they're charging you $50,000 for this 2012 Honda
Right.
Civic with
And they put
100,000 miles on
they
it.
got some
And
dice around the
saying,
mirror.
we're,
They put some dice around the
right.
mirror, right?
And we're gonna invest in you. We're gonna invest 100 grand in you, but you got to buy this 2012 Honda Civic though, as a part of this investment program when it's at the peak, as opposed to when they got it for $1,200 in
Right.
2008.
And the
And
assets on the downside, the assets are falling.
exactly. So that is a fair critique. That's a part of the trick bag. That after they have spiked assets, after they have eaten high off the hog for how many years, have been the primary participant to bad monetary policy, to the current inflation that is happening. And then you want to say, oh, black women will be the saviors.
Have you
Black
this
women will.
well, I mean, have you? I mean, this isn't this what they were saying about welfare years ago, back in the 60s and 70s? That you take the
Yep.
black man out of the equation, a black woman doesn't need a black man. So now you got a
Yep.
bunch of black women who can look to white men for what they need a black man for. They can look to white men for resources for white men to take care of them and provide opportunities for them.
And that's the argument of
All
the divestors.
all all created by the Obama administration. So all these
That
black
that
folks,
is.
all these black men, you watch. I know you. Hold on, I'm looking right in this camera. Know a lot of black men watch this show. I know you repeat what we say verbatim. We can track it. We can track it. I know you like to listen to us. All you black men who was praising Obama back in 2008 and 2009, 2010. Now,
Yep.
it's so chic now. It's so chic to criticize the Democratic Party and to criticize the Obama administration now that he's not in office and now that it's popular.
Right.
It's popular
The
now.
plantation wasn't the plantation.
Right. It wasn't popular. It wasn't
Back
popular in
then.
2008 and 2009. Now all of a sudden everybody's questioning the Democratic Party. Everybody's thinking about starting a podcast called Trump and the GE, but that's already been started. So you're a little late to the party. But I'm saying this is what it's come to. Is this not like we take a black man out of the equation? You don't need a black man now. You can go right to white men for resources and for opportunities.
That's really what it boils down to. Like I said, that's even just from the when we look at essentially the trick bag. Like, what is the trick bag? That's where my moral conundrum lies. But I also understand. I understand both sides from black women's. Like, if you're a black woman between the ages of 25 and 45, and you got to get it how you live it, educated. You may have children, may not have children. You're looking to, kind of carve your space out in this world. You are going to do what you need to do, what you feel, what you deem is necessary. So, and I don't think, we can critique that along political ideology. We can critique that from a social lens. We can critique that from an economic lens. But at the end of the day, is that going to change the fact that, Maslow's hierarchy still reigns supreme irrespective of race? All right. You still got to put clothes on your back. You still got to put food in your belly.
I'm not
Like it comes down to the core, but I definitely, have more smoke for Goldman, have more smoke even for the program. I guess kudos to the women that move the harm reduction ball one more inch, because that for me, that's what this really is. It falls under the category of harm reduction, that which essentially the thinking is that by either investing within oppressed communities, marginalized communities, underrepresented communities, then we can, instead of moving the bully, we can, get in the weight room, we can get in the gym and learn to fight back.
Yeah,
And hope that the bully won't mess with us anymore. So
I'm
we
sure a
can
lot of these
reduce
women.
the harm.
I'm sure a lot of these women who went to Stanford undergrad and Harvard grad school. I'm sure they're really oppressed.
Oh, I'm quite sure.
I'm sure they're from marginalized. I'm sure they're from marginalized communities.
I'm sure
from
they're
marginalized communities.
skiing and whooping all over the halls, just like when Kamala, was announced. You heard all the Divine Nine come out to celebrate because this is another notch in the belt for them. This is, the black middle class continues to thrive,
This is
and this is another notch, seemingly notch in that black middle class belt. But outside of that, outside of getting it done, my critique, even for the women that got it started, is why even settle for, frankly, such piss poor results? $1 billion, like, if $1 billion could be invested in the black community and fix and act and in a serious way, like, let's, like, remove all the vitriol, remove all the critique, and, like, let's get to brass tacks. If $1 billion was all that it took to address the serious inequities that exist within education, within healthcare, within finance, within home ownership, within the black community, wouldn't we be significantly farther ahead as a community with
but you're
aggregate
talking,
resources?
but
Like,
you're
come
talking
on,
about,
this is
but
a
you're talking
joke.
about, but you're talking about collect. You're talking about collectivism. You're talking about collectivism, right?
Right. I mean, when we
But
look at
they're
data,
not. They're not looking at it collectively. They're looking at it as $1 billion for me.
I'm,
They're looking at it like you
maybe.
saying what you may say as $1 billion that is cents on a dollar. It may not. Maybe a drop in the bucket, but it's still more $1 billion for them relative to black men. This is a zero. This is a zero sum game. You can't tell me that this program or these type of programs have been in the works for years. You can't tell me. I don't even know who we know Goldman Sachs even came up with the idea. It wasn't coming from a group of
I'm
black
sure
women.
they didn't.
So from a group of black women. But from Goldman Sachs standpoint, you may find this hard to believe. But when I was younger, I was real suave and debonair, right? And they asked me. I was asked, and they courted me to be an MC for a black beauty pageant in Prince Edward County when I was in high school.
Okay.
And now they asked me to do it, and I had to accept. But I'm like, wow. I'm thinking like, wow. I've never been an MC before. I do have I'm charming to a fault, and but one side benefit, I get to be around all these good-looking black women for a weekend.
Right. Right. Such a tough job.
Right. I'm sure. I'm sure Goldman Sachs never connected those dots.
Right. I'm almost positive.
Right. They want to be around. Why they want to be around all these black women with no black men around? All these black
Listen.
women, they all to themselves. A bunch of men in the conference room and one or two black women in the conference room, all by themselves. I wonder. Why would they want that? No black men around. I can only imagine.
Listen, but if, that's a whole other.
That's called
Like,
that's
because
that's an investment program. Okay.
that's a whole
Okay.
other show. But I will say that if everything was kosher, then the black woman Tarana Burke would not have found it useful to come up with a Me Too movement.
Mm.
If everything was kosher in these boardrooms, if
Mm.
everything was on the up and up, and this other community that has historically been the beneficiaries of the black community's oppression, both financially and asset wise, all of a sudden has a shift. And minds and hearts can change, I suppose. But what's clear is that there's obviously a significant amount of harassment, a significant amount of sexual assault that happens within the corporate arena. Because otherwise, we wouldn't need, there would be no usefulness. When these hashtags go out, it would just fall on deaf ears. It would be, the anomalies, kind of the one-offs. And that's not the case. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at,
But
I'll
I mean,
leave that at that.
right, I've
Say
done. I mean,
that.
I wouldn't even call. I mean, anyway, I've done a lot of research on Virginia history, and one of the things you know, research, during Reconstruction that, as far as how these races going to get along in the state of Virginia, how these races going to get along. So there's a lot of horse trading, right? How these races going to get along, and African Americans want to enjoy the fruits of they want to enjoy the fruits of their labor, and they want access to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness like everybody else. But white men were particularly concerned about black women, protecting white women, and so they were adamant, they didn't want white women seen in public with black men. They didn't want them to go to school together. They were adamant they did not want them working together. And they were adamant, particularly adamant, they didn't want a black man to be a white woman's boss on the job.
And let's be clear that this is
that was
not
pretty interesting.
Let's also be very clear that these people still walk the face of the planet. They still hold a large portion of the assets in this country. When we talk about boomers, that's exactly the generation that you're referring to, are boomers.
Right.
And even with all of the advances in technology, when we look at the stratification of wealth concentration, is still significantly in the hands of the boomer generation. So I just wanted to put that out there, that we're not talking about,
It wasn't
20 years ago.
Right. It's not like again, I keep going back to, it's not just a statistic. The boomers have all this wealth and all these assets, and black folks' land percentage ownership went down. But when you print $30 trillion to give everybody but black folks and poor people, what do you think? What would you expect to happen? But anyway, so you have Goldman Sachs is adamant that they want black women working for them, or black women under their tutelage. So I'll leave it at that. So I guess you call that an investment program. Okay.
Right.
I'm talking about the real world, and so you seem like a lot of black women are eager to go for that. See how many people can dance between the raindrops. And anyway, so last parting shot, Mr. Mitchell.
Man, I just feel like all of it is a hot mess. I guess specifically with the Goldman program, like I said, I guess hats off, to the black women that I'm sure feel they worked extremely hard to bring such a program to Goldman, and to get them to agree to these terms, and to secure this level of funding that's considered unprecedented for black women. And I think in some regards that is acknowledgeable and notable. However, I guess from a material analysis, it's what are you doing? What are you doing? The hard work, is literally crumbs. You know it's crumbs. And I think if we were serious about the approaches, there wouldn't have been a compromise on frankly, I would have rather seen these same women collectivize around pushing for reparations. Like, you might as well, because what is $10 billion going to do?
That's collectivism, all right?
Right. Like, at least
they don't get 10 billion.
Well, there you go, right? So I feel like if we're serious about the inequities within black households, because the core part of the messaging of Black Womenomics is community, and if it's beyond just the marketing of trying to leverage black faces in high places to prop those few folks up, and it's truly about community, then you already know that this $1 billion isn't going to do a damn thing, frankly, especially an entire billion over a year that's supposed to address the largest gaps in the country, irrespective of race. Like, that's the nail in the coffin is that education, finance, home ownership, healthcare are huge issues in the country, period. And you think $1 billion across all, not for each of those sectors, but you're talking about chopping up $1 billion across all of those sectors, and that's supposed to do what? And we just pumped out $30 trillion and still didn't, like, no
Right.
one was able to fix those inequities. Um, you know what I mean? Like, the reality is, unfortunately, it's a waste of time, a waste of effort. It is not really going to amount to a hill of beans, other than again, some closed doors, some title changes, some access to more capital for the few, and it creates an increased black buffer class. And
Mm.
really, that is the interest here, is that this is meant to prop up the black buffer class so that they can be the new gatekeepers. It's their turn. We already see it on the social level with the Black Lives Matter REIT that Patrice Cullors started. Uh, you know what I mean? Like, how many
They're
trick
Marxists.
bags?
They're
Right,
Marxists.
the Marxists, the
The Groucho Marxists. The Groucho
Marxists,
Marxists.
the Black Lives Matter Marxist REIT. Like, how
It's
many
all a
more
REIT.
trick
It's all
bags
a REIT. It's
you
all a REIT.
can
Look how much real estate the Obama's on.
exactly. It's like, how many more trick bags can the black community take? How many more? Like, we don't need talking heads and bobbleheads in our community. If you are saying you're serious about the community, and the community is truly your objective to fix inequities, like, let's be serious then about the community. Like, cut the bull. Like,
Right, right.
that's
But
really
I
what
don't
it
think.
is. And that's, yeah.
Okay.
So I guess that's my parting shot, is that
I
um the program is just kind of, yeah.
I don't think it's BS. I don't think it's BS. I think it's clearly a program for individuals and careerists. You can call
Yeah.
it what you want, but it's a program for individuals and careerists, and
Yep.
it's for these individual women to help them individually and help their careers, and nothing to do with black community, and nothing to do with anything
Right.
collective, and
Exactly. Like,
you
stop
basically just
using
have
us as your prop, in other words.
you have a bunch of people. You have to sell it as a thing that's going to benefit black folks. You just have a bunch of people with melanin in their skin who's gonna help their career personally, but you have to while we're talking about the 30 trillion that went to Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, they have to get more recruits who look
Right.
like us, so they bring more people into the fold and let them sell. I guess what Cornel West would call this neoliberal policy. So
Yep.
now you're recruiting more black folks to sell this policy of printing money and giving it to Obama's donor, somebody he wanted to work for. He left office, somebody he wanted to sleep with, because it's now going to trickle down to some black women. All you're doing is growing a bunch of black capitalists that had nothing to do with African Americans or the community at all.
Right.
And some people feel that that's progress. There are people who feel that because I get to get money from Goldman Sachs, I get to work on Wall Street. That's the benefit of the civil rights movement or what have you. Or if, for instance, my mother and my aunts and uncles, they marched during the '60s for civil rights and so on and so forth. They knew that's what they were marching for. Maybe they could have taken a couple of days off. Maybe their feet wouldn't hurt so much. If they had known
Right.
this is what they were marching for, talking about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers, if they know this is what they were marching for and fighting for, maybe they could have lived a lot
Right.
longer.
Right.
But
Maybe Muhammad Ali would have had more belts, instead of making the sacrifice to his career,
right,
if he had known that this would have been the outcome, frankly,
right,
because
right,
Muhammad Ali
right.
has shown more principles than I think what we're currently seeing across this black buffer class. So,
And they probably thought
uh,
Muhammad Ali was a fool,
yeah, and even
and the
before
people,
him, Paul Robeson. Like,
right, exactly. They probably thought they were fools, but you have to recruit more people to sell this to the black community and to drown people like us out. So now Obama recruited a bunch of celebrities. He underwrote
Right.
his White House. He underwrote a bunch of concerts for rappers to make money off of. Invited celebrities to the White House. Invited a bunch of black journalists to the White House, and have become his biggest publicists. They have become
Yep.
his biggest press agents, and they can drown a lot of black folks out. You know what I'm saying? But anyway,
That's it.
so that's Trump and the GE. Goldman invests $10 billion into black women. Stock Exchange, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Take care.